Hello, Rachel.
Are we ready?
Yeah, so how you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Brilliant. Right, so part two of our phenomenally interesting conversation about your school and about your approach. And for anyone watching this who hasn't seen part one, please do go on to the YouTube channel and watch part one, because it was so content rich. So we're just going to kind of finish off really with part two, focusing on a couple of areas. Well, one of the counter arguments that I see a lot, and it's quite a polarized argument, oddly enough. One of the arguments that I see a lot is that what about all those children who are somehow not getting their needs met because they're being bullied, or because they're in school with children who are particularly challenging, or they have people in their classroom that are preventing them from learning? All very real scenarios. And so my question to you would be, in the context of your school, a school that for 9 years has worked in a relationship focused way, does not exclude, does not use rewards and consequences, how do you deal with that? I mean, I have my own ideas about how that works in the context of your school, but please.
It's a really interesting question, and it's one that we get asked a lot by parents, obviously, because parents send their children to school to be safe, and that's our priority, really. And I think there isn't an easy answer. I think the answer for us is our hugely fantastic staff. We have a huge team of staff who have lots of expertise, lots of experience, and hold lots of wisdom, really. So that stems from kind of, me and the senior leadership team, but then we have, as part of the whole school team, we have a care, who we call our care team, and within our care team there's some really specific members of staff which I'll talk about in a little while, but all of our teachers, all of our teaching assistants are all trauma aware, attachment aware, so the classroom settings are very nurturing in and of themselves. We also have a very active nurture room, and a nurture setting for those children. We talk about intensive care, really. So for those children who need a bit of intensive care, because because everybody gets some of it in the classrooms, the difference between the nurture room, and I think sometimes nurture rooms don't work because the difference is too marked between the nurture room and the classroom. For us, the difference is just that there are fewer children and more adults. More adult to child ratio in the nurture room, and that's quite a rigorous process now. We've honed that now, so it's a really rigorous process. So the nurture aspect is really quite effective in terms of those children who are exhibiting behaviours that are challenging because of an attachment difficulty. There are children who don't access that at all because their difficulty isn't attachment related. We have in our care team, we have a counsellor, which isn't that unusual, I don't think, anywhere. I think lots of schools have at least access to a counsellor. But we also have a play therapist who provides filial therapy, and I'm saying words I don't really understand, but it doesn't matter because I don't do it. So she provides filial therapy and play therapy to our children and our families. But she also, really importantly, provides supervision type support to our staff. So for our staff who are experiencing children who have challenging or vulnerable behaviours in the classrooms, they have supervision sessions with her and another member of our care team, another senior member of our care team, strategy plans that I think we were talking about a little bit this morning. So it's really practical support from those people to our staff as well, about when situations arise in the classroom, how we might manage those for that particular child. And we also have a social worker who's employed by us, so not centrally employed. She's our social worker. So for families who are very vulnerable, of which we have several, what the presence of our social worker means is that, for one, I can sleep at night because I know the safeguarding stuff's really strong, but it also means that they have someone who stands shoulder to shoulder with them as well, that they don't feel like they have to hide anything from, because there's no risk, in a sense, of asking for Juliet's support.
Okay, so you have your own social worker,
yeah,
a play therapist,
Yeah.
Clinical supervision.
Yeah.
So I know for a fact there'll be people watching you going, there's no way we could have that in our school. We don't have the money. You know, it's all right for them, I think might be what some people might think. How do you do that in the context of where we are in terms of funding for schools and for education, and how that's playing out across the country? How on earth do you have such a robust team like that?
I'm not quite sure. A little bit of magic from our school business manager, I think. No, I think it ultimately those roles are all part-time roles. So there's an element of that it is a part-time, that they are part-time posts. So that there's a bit of saving in that. But I think also the fact that, I mean, you can afford what you value, I think, and it's about the really high value of those staff for us. We also have a part-time Senko who's non-teaching as well, but I think it's about really valuing the support that those people can provide. So when you're leading a school, when you're managing a budget like that, it's about making sure that you can meet those needs, and it might mean that you don't do things elsewhere, but those needs are kind of, they are the priority. So it's about, you know, we might pare things down in other places, but it's not in terms of that. That's not very helpful, actually, is it? But it is just about really, if you value it enough, you can find a way to afford it, I think.
Yeah, and that leads me on to another question then that I'm sure people will have on the tip of their tongues, which is, how does that play out in terms of academic achievement? Because regardless of what you and I understand about how safe we have to feel before we learn, the pressures that are coming top down in terms of what kind of things are measured and how they're attained, and really what Ofsted are willing to place as important in terms of their assessment of all of that. How does that play out for you?
Well, I mean, my philosophy and our philosophy as a school is, if children don't feel safe enough to learn anyway, they're not going to learn. So there's no point trying to make them, because that just re-traumatizes or you know, makes the children very, very stressed, and exaggerates the challenging behaviours that we see. So for us, it is, I think you used the phrase front loading this morning. I think it's about front loading to make sure we're putting that support in place. And yes, they might not be in class for the 6 weeks or however long that it takes, but actually the progress that they then make as safe, secure learners is phenomenal. So we reap the benefits later on. And we have loads of case studies for that, where some of, you know, where the provision that we're putting in place for these children has massive impacts further on. And, you know, and in some cases, you have to kind of just take it on the chin that the most important thing for that child is that they feel safe. And, you know, and if that is at the loss of, you know, making expected progress, or not making expected progress, but being at the age-related expectation, then sometimes that's a hit you have to take, because children need to feel safe first. And it might be that then the benefits are reaped at Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4.
Oh, that's so beautiful to hear, because as you say, I mean, that's front loading, not just for the year ahead for that classroom teacher, but that's front loading for that child as they move through the education system. And we do know that if we think about trauma, that we're not going to be always dealing with a chronological age and a biological age at the same place. And the fact that you're willing to do all that work, you know, has such potential to alter the trajectory for that child. And that just fills my heart. I love that. I'm
glad we talk about filling your bucket. I think you've heard me use that phrase, or seen me use the phrase about filling your bucket. So I'm glad we filled your bucket there, Lisa.
You totally have. And I'm very aware that you're going to be needing to get home at some point. So I just want to finish up with one last question, really. I'm a firm believer that we are motivated by our experiences. They drive us, they feed our passion, they're why we go into the kind of work that we go into. And so I'm interested in what motivated you to come into this work and to be so passionate, actually, not just coming into the work. Why did you go into education and teaching? But to become so passionate about relational approaches to behaviour 9 years ago, when it wasn't hip, it wasn't cool, it wasn't trendy, and there were not lots of people wandering about going, this is the future. How did you get to that point?
So in terms of coming into teaching, it's a long story, but it can be told quite shortly. My grandma was a teacher, and 4 of her 5 children were teachers. 3 of them ended their careers as primary heads. My mum being one of those 3. My auntie was a secondary, I think she was leader of a department, head of a department or something. So it kind of is in the blood. I was never going to be a teacher. I did a science degree, of which I can remember nothing. And I was going to go into forensic science or medicine. And then between my 2nd and 3rd year at uni, when I'd finished for the summer, my mum's school secretary had gone off suddenly on sick. So she asked me to fill in because I was the person who was next available. And I think she thought I would be cheap labour. And as soon as I kind of went into school and spent that length of time in a school, and kind of be in front of house, you see the vulnerable kids first, I think, don't you? And that at that point, that was, this is it for me. This is what I want to do. So I did a postgraduate. I actually did the graduate teacher program at that point, and the rest is history, really. But I think in terms of my philosophy, it has matured and evolved over the years, and I've been teaching now for 21 years, which makes me go like that. But I think I'm a very different teacher than I was when I was 21, and obviously that comes with age and maturity, I think, a little bit. But also when I first started my headship, which was 11 years ago now, I was really lucky to have an educational psychologist that we work really closely with, who was really passionate about attachment-based learning, attachment-based parenting, and she supported our school and really talked to us many times about the importance of attachment and how behaviours may well manifest themselves outside of commas, and was really quite passionate. Early philosophy as a head, and I'll always be immensely grateful to her for that. She also talks about nurture a lot. Her expertise was nurture, which follows on from the expertise about attachment. So our nurture practice was very much founded in those very early years with Julie, who was the educational psychologist. We also were lucky enough to get restorative approaches training at a very similar time to that, so the two fit together and dovetailed quite nicely. And I have a professional coach or a mentor who actually is now a very, very, very valued and loved friend. And he absolutely pushes us ever further really into that humanistic approach about how can we get it righter. He uses the phrase righter for our children. So how can we get it righter for all of our children? All of the time, and how can we make sure that the system is 100% for 100% of the kids? So the half-formed ideas then become a perfect storm, and with the right support and the right staff, and the right support from the governing body. And I've always been really lucky that our governing body have really valued the things that we've talked about. So it's a perfect storm really. So the philosophy has evolved and emerged, and is still evolving, and will continue, I hope, to evolve. But the focus is always getting it righter for all of our kids. Aww. Not just all of our kids.
Yeah. So that's so lovely, Rachel. And I'm sure I said it this morning. I'm sure I've said it on Twitter, and I'll say it again. You are a real champion for children, and we really need lots of champions for children right now. It's a challenging climate. It's a difficult time in education, and people like you just make my heart sing. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Can I just interrupt as well, because I forgot I wanted to say these bits about the children that we've met along the way, and I think the children that there are 4 or 5 children. I mean, all the children that have gone through our school are all incredibly important to us, but there are perhaps a handful, 5 or 6, that have really changed the way we practice and have really made us look really hard at our provision, because it hasn't fit for them, and it's not been fit for them. So they're, There are children who came to us initially from AP who'd had really bad experience in alternative provision, came to us as a mainstream provider and thrived. But they thrived because we really analysed what our provision did for them. But then there was a little boy, and I think I've spoken to you about him before, where he'd come to us at the beginning of his year 2, having experienced between the age of 3 and that point, I think 9 failed foster placements and a failed adoption and separation from his birth family, but his birth brother, and came to us in a hugely traumatized state. And we had to really, because we didn't want to fail, because we didn't want him to have another failed attempt at being part of and belonging to something. So we had to really look at how we were going to set our school up for him and change our school. And I think that's the difference. And we think we're talking about just a change in, we'll say the child needs to change this to belong to our school, and actually we look at it from the other angle and say, what do we do that will enable us to change? What can we change that will enable us to fit this child? And that's a real difference. And I think, and that's why the process evolves, because there will always be the next child that really challenges us, because there will always be a child that we're not right for. So it's about how we make that happen for those children. Sorry, I was just interrupted you. I thought that was quite important to say.
It's very important. And I think, that just sort of leaves me with one last question, really, because I think part 1 and now part 2 has just been so content rich for people to think about how they might move their school forward, or how they might move their own individual practice forward. But what I would ask then, just finally, is if there was one thing that you could say to somebody that might convince them to work in this way and to challenge their current practice and think about working in a relational approach, what would you say to them?
It's about, for me, it's about looking to the future, and how what we're creating for a person will massively impact on who they are in the future. And I think that I just want to make sure that whatever we do has a really positive impact on everybody in the future. So some of the experiences that our children have will shape the way they behave in the future, and the way they behave might be really negatively to my daughter in a relationship, or my son, or so I want to make sure that our school, that our provision is doing no harm, but actually is doing good for all of our kids, because we don't want to ever be, and I'm going to use the word responsible, because I think we are, as practitioners and as professionals, responsible for shaping somebody's lives so that they can't be a useful, kind, good human being. And that's the real driver for me. If we front load early on with really good relationship stuff, then we impact the world in a really positive place, and it will change the world if we impact that if we have that impact on enough children. Then it is world changing, and it can be life changing. And it's a starfish story, isn't it? It changed the world for that one, and actually that's enough. So if we can change the world, we're changing the world one child at a time, really.
Beautiful. I can't think of a better place to end our conversation. I just want to thank you again.
Thank you.
I think you're fantastic. Really enjoyed speaking to you, and have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.